All right, so let's just dive right in. There's this market open where you can bet on whether inflation prints 3.9% or higher next month. Capital's sitting at 0.62, but the narrative, it's saying 0.40. What's that telling us, really, about where expectations truly lie?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, isn't it? April 29th, that was Powell's last FOMC vote as chair, actually. It was 8-4, the most divided since '92. And Powell's keeping his governor's seat through this whole renovations investigation. That's not just courtesy, Marcus. It's a structural roadblock. It truly speaks volumes.
Wow, okay. And the same week, Michigan's sentiment really tanked, 48.2, lowest in 80 years, worse than '08, worse than COVID. But then the S&P is above 7,300. Both numbers measure the same country, but only one feels like it's measuring what's happening to most of it. There's this huge disconnect. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a huge disconnect. And the coverage always reads that 8-4 split as hawks versus doves. But that's the wrong fight, honestly. 4 officials are actually disagreeing about whether the dual mandate is a hard boundary or just, a tunable variable. It's a constitutional collision unfolding.
Okay, so Tuesday, May 12th, 8:30 Eastern, April CPI prints. And you're saying within 30 seconds that contract moves, right? Below 0.55, narrative wins. Above 0.70, capital was right. The price, it's the report, right? How do we even predict that before the official numbers hit?
Well, that's where the Nowcast comes in, right? The Cleveland Fed runs this model, updating daily. Brent crude, retail gasoline, the BLS component, it all just gets fed in continuously. It spits out a year-over-year inflation projection every business day. As of May 8th, it projected May 2026 CPI at 3.89% year-over-year, with the second quarter pace annualizing at 5.78%. It's like really fast.
So the official BLS isn't even telling us that yet, right? April CPI isn't until May 12th, and May CPI isn't until June 10th. So the Nowcast is running 32 days ahead of the data the official narrative is anchored to. That's a massive lead time, isn't it?
Exactly. Picture the difference, right? It's like a thermometer in your mouth versus a thermal scanner at an airport gate. The thermometer reads after your body's equilibrated to a fever. The scanner, though, it sees the temperature gradient on your skin in real time, Marcus, before you even know you're sick. The Nowcast, it's the scanner. The BLS print, that's the thermometer. That 22-point gap on the contract, that's the time the body needs to equilibrate. It's a really stark difference.
That's such a clear analogy. But, coverage keeps citing Michigan inflation expectations as evidence that things are softening. But that's not really what the survey measures, is it? It feels like we're misinterpreting the signals.
No, it's absolutely not. Joanne Hu's own statement highlighted that roughly a third of consumers cited gasoline, 30% cited tariffs. Those aren't expectations, Marcus. Those are reports of lived cost transmission. People are describing what they paid yesterday, not forecasting future prices. So the entire optimism anchoring frame just collapses,
Yeah, which means the narrative about easing expectations is just wrong. The data underneath says people are describing pain they've already absorbed. And every survey is structurally a slow signal, right? Monthly cadence, 2-week lag, always behind the curve.
Totally. The Nowcast updates daily. The contract updates by the second. That 22-point gap isn't disagreement about the world. It's just the latency between two pricing systems running on the same inputs, but at different speeds. It's fascinating, like a snail and a cheetah looking at the same thing.
So let's talk about the supply-side mechanism, because that feels really critical. The Iran war started in February, crude is up about 40%, retail gas is at $4.55, and the Strait of Hormuz is constrained. This energy input through the Nowcast, that's a hard physical constraint monetary policy just can't reach, isn't it? Like, it's out of their hands.
Yes, and that's the part, Marcus, that really has to land. The Federal Reserve cannot reopen a street. They can hold rates, cut rates, talk about cutting rates, but none of those actions reduces the marginal cost of a barrel produced under a Hormuz bottleneck, which is precisely why the Nowcast model, which weights physical inputs over policy talk, is reading this supply-side shock as durable. It's not going away just because they say so, This is a physical, unmoving reality.
And the household consequence isn't just theoretical here, right? The bottom 90% of households, they hold roughly 13% of individually held equity. The top 10% hold the other 87%. So when the S&P prints 7,300, that's really the top decile's economy. But when the gas pump prints $4.55, that's like the bottom 90%'s economy. Both numbers are real, but they're describing completely different layers of the country. That's the answer to our opening question, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. That's the answer to the question we opened with. Both numbers measure the same country, but they measure different layers. The 48.2 sentiment reading, that's the bottom 90% reporting the layer they live in. The S&P at 7,300, that's the top 10% reporting theirs. Neither number is wrong, Marcus. They're just measuring different floors of the same building. Do you know what I mean? It's not that one is right and the other is wrong. They're both telling us truth, just different truths.
So, but the contract resolution, doesn't really care about either survey, right? It cares about the BLS print. So whatever the Nowcast says, whatever Michigan says, May 12th settles April, June 10th settles May. The price level signal hits the official record on those two dates. So even with all this context, those dates are still really important. But Marilyn, there's also something else coverage isn't tracking, is there? This whole Powell situation?
Yeah, exactly. Here's what nobody's really tracking: Powell's continued governor seat. Most reporting reads it as transition courtesy, just staying on through the renovations investigation, making sure that closes cleanly. But that's just the surface, Marcus. The mechanism, it's actually different. The Federal Reserve Act gives governors a 14-year term. The chair is a separate 4-year appointment. But the underlying seat as a board member, that runs 14 years. Those staggered terms are designed to outlast presidencies. Powell's chair appointment ends mid-May, but his governor's seat doesn't. That's a big deal.
So when Powell signals he's holding the governor's seat through this renovations investigation, he's invoking that 14-year statute as a structural lever, isn't he? I mean, the executive branch can nominate a new chair, like Kevin Warsh, but they can't just pack the board with new appointments while Powell occupies that seat. It's pretty strategic. This is about more than just a smooth transition, right?
Absolutely. The renovations investigation isn't the substance, Marcus. It's just the procedural shell. The substance is the term structure. Powell is treating that 14-year statutory term as a hard boundary, but the executive branch, by treating Fed independence as a variable to be optimized through chair selection, it's treating the same statute as a tunable parameter. It's this fundamental difference in how they interpret the very rules of the game. It's fascinating to watch unfold.
So we're really seeing the Fed's foundational rules being tested then. And you see this across the dissent too, right? Hammock, Kashkari, Logan, they dissent on language. They refuse easing bias wording in the FOMC statement without confirming data. They're treating the statement as a policy instrument with a hard data prerequisite. That's a boundary. But then Moran, he dissents on rate. He wants to cut 25 basis points immediately, even ahead of data, because the labor market is softening. So variable, right?
Exactly, Marcus. Same statute, same dual mandate, but 4 officials are reading it 4 different ways at the same table. That's not just a policy disagreement, That's a constitutional disagreement about what kind of object the dual mandate actually is. Is it a hard set boundary or a flexible variable? It's a really deep question about the very nature of the institution.
Wow. So what happens if this architectural disagreement continues to play out? Suppose the new chair builds consensus by relaxing that language data prerequisite. Suppose FOMC statements over the next 8 months start including forward guidance not strictly tied to printed data. What then?
Then the Hammock-Kashkari-Logan dissent line either holds, they keep refusing the language, or it folds, Marcus, and the language's boundary norm becomes negotiable. And here's the part that really compounds. Constraint keeping under that scenario, it stops being rational. Right now, holding the language line is the path of structural least friction. It's what the statute is for. But the day the new chair treats statement language as negotiable, dissent becomes the costlier path. Constraint keeping becomes heroic. It requires a regional bank president to spend institutional capital they otherwise wouldn't need to spend. That's a big ask.
So 5 years out then, the dissent rate, it just becomes the indicator, right? If 8 to 4 becomes the floor, if every meeting prints with 3 or 4 dissents, then the architecture is operating under sustained boundary versus variable disagreement. And that disagreement is like doing real work. But if it returns to unanimous, one side has won. And historical patterns, they kind of suggest variable treatment wins by default, don't they? Boundary keeping requires active vigilance. That sounds like a lot of effort.
Totally. Variable treatment is always the path of least friction. And Marcus, nobody is asking this. But if the dual mandate is being treated as a variable by some and a boundary by others, if the statute is doing 2 different jobs at the same table, what happens when it has to do one thing under pressure? May 12th prints hot, June 10th prints hotter. September arrives and the new chair has to choose. You don't get to keep treating it both ways. Eventually, the architecture commits. That's the real ultimate test, you know?
So let's kind of push on the actionable frame you've been building, Marilyn. The May 12th print, the contract reaction, even if CPI May 26 prints above 7.0, what does that tell us, practically speaking? Is it just for this specific moment?
Well, it tells them the price level signal was correct for sure. It tells them the Nowcast methodology beat the survey methodology on this specific data point. But Marcus, that's for one data point across 32 days. The contract resolves, but the regime question doesn't. You said earlier the price is the report. The price is a report. It reports on the next 32 days. It does not report on the next 24 months. And the architecture question, boundary or variable, that operates on the longer cycle. So we're like looking at really different scales here.
That's fair. But I'd push back on the framing that you have to choose, you know? The contract integrates information faster for its window. A series of resolutions builds a regime read. The May print tells you this month. The dissent rate at June FOMC tells you this quarter's architecture. The dot plot in September tells you the year's commitment. The signals, they kind of nest, don't they? There are layers.
They nest if the listener is willing to operate on multiple timescales simultaneously. But most listeners, most analysts, honestly, they just collapse to one scale. They watch May 12th, the contract resolves yes, and then they stop tracking the dissent rate because the price level question has been answered. The architecture question gets dropped. That's the analytical trap, I guess.
Then the working frame is, don't drop the harder question when the easier one resolves. The May 12th signal is necessary, but not sufficient. You watch the contract for the price level read, and you watch the dissent rate at every subsequent FOMC for the architecture read. So it's a dual approach, really.
Exactly. And to see this in action, think about Kalshi. You've got CPI-May 26th, which we've discussed, but also things like the WHO Public Health Emergency or the AI Data Security Executive Order. It's the same mechanical pricing logic, Marcus, just applied to completely different domains. It's like watching capital price the mechanism across all these areas.
Right. Capital pricing the mechanism, not just the language. And the consistency across these domains, that's regime evidence, which means the answer to our original tension has an even deeper layer now, doesn't it? It's not just 2 numbers.
It absolutely does. Both numbers, the 48.2 Michigan sentiment and the 7,300 S&P, they measure the same country at different floors. But there's a third measurement we haven't even named yet, the Kalshi pattern. It measures the architecture. And the architecture? That's the question neither the survey nor the index really touches. That's the really deep, underlying tension.
So the listener walks out holding 3 signals. The May 12th print and the contract reaction inside 30 seconds, that's the price level signal. The bottom 90% versus top 10% layer split, that's the standing structural read. And the dissent rate trajectory at June and September, that's the architecture read. Different timescales, all 3 live, all 3 important. So, Tuesday, May 12th, 8:30 Eastern, the BLS releases April CPI.
CPI May 26 moves within 30 seconds. Below 0.55, the narrative path holds, and we got this episode wrong. Above 0.70, Capital had it, and you knew it before any reporting caught up. That's the price level signal. Watch it, because it's coming fast.
Yeah. And the haunting part, Marcus, the price level signal resolves in 32 days, but the architecture question doesn't. The regional bank presidents holding the language line, they're protected by 14-year statutory terms, but only as long as the institution treats those terms as a hard boundary. The day the term structure becomes a variable, the dissent stops mattering. We don't yet know whether the new chair treats the architecture as boundary or variable. We will know by September. May 12th is the test, but September is really the verdict. That's the one that's going to tell us everything about the Fed's future.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this insightful discussion on the hidden layers of our economy and monetary policy. If you found this conversation valuable, please make sure to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, share it with your network, and subscribe to our channel. Your support truly helps us grow and continue bringing you these in-depth analyses.
It's crucial, now more than ever, to understand these underlying tensions and how they shape our financial future, from the smallest daily transactions to the grand architecture of our institutions.
Absolutely. Staying informed on these nuanced signals is key, especially as we navigate such complex times. We appreciate you joining us today.